Speaking about the India-China agreement on the disengagement, he said, and I quote, "We have gone back to 2020 situation. Disengagement process has been completed and that we have reached an understanding to allow patrolling." Remember, India and China have arrived on a patrolling arrangement along the line of actual control in the Himalayas, and it can lead to disengagement and resolution of tension that began with skirmishes in May 2020. Now, Foreign Secretary also mentioned this today, that the breakthrough came ahead of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Russia to attend the BRICS summit tomorrow. It is understood that the agreement pertains to patrolling in Depsang and Demchok areas. Let's in fact listen in to what Dr. S Jaishankar had to say about the India-China agreement.
Foreign Secretary has said is what I can also say, that for those who have not heard that we reached an agreement on patrolling, and with that the disengagement, we have gone back to where the situation was in 2020, and we can say with that the disengagement process with China, you can say, has been completed. So, so far I would say that's as much as I can share with you. I'm sure in due course iske details वगैरह निकलेंगे.
So, will now India be able to patrol in the areas of Galwan, Depsang?
No, you see, there are areas which, for various reasons, after 2020, because they had blocked us, so we had blocked them. So दो तरफा था, Bob. So what has happened is we have reached an understanding which will allow the patrolling. For example, you spoke about Depsang. That's not the only place. There are other places also. So I think the understanding, to my knowledge, is that we will be able to do the patrolling which we were doing in 2020. India, China, I mean, in a way, if you look at it, we are the only two countries with more than 1 billion people. We have a certain civilizational history, and all of that people know. And today we are on a track of, I would say, economic recovery or rejuvenation. And there is no question anybody who's predicting, if you are predicting developments of this century, I mean, definitely you cannot leave India and China out of that equation. We are very, very prominent, very key almost in a way, I would say. But here is the challenge for us, which is that we are neighbors. We have unresolved boundary issue. There are, they have been rising. We have also been rising. So if two neighboring countries, two large neighboring countries rise next to each other in the same time frame, it's not easy. There are very, very few historical parallels for that. So managing this double rise, you can say, that too in proximity. If one was in some other part of the world, it's a different issue. I think these will require a lot of skill and a lot of deftness and diplomacy. And the truth is, our capabilities will change, our influence will change, our ambitions will change.
All right, my colleague Vishnu Shom joins us at the moment. Vishnu, just give us a sense of how big is this development, especially when you look at the last 4 years. And the External Affairs Minister there mentioned that we have gone back to the 2020 situation. Break it down for us.
Well, this is the biggest development in India-China relations since the crisis in 2020, when there were violent clashes in Galwan, in which 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives, and in which several more, perhaps Chinese soldiers, did. The exact number of Chinese deaths is a matter of controversy. As a result of an agreement which has taken place between India and China, and which will perhaps, more details of which will emerge when the Prime Minister visits Russia for the BRICS summit in the next few days, patrolling rights, and that's the key issue, of Indian soldiers has been restored in eastern Ladakh. Now, this is absolutely critical because India was, in the crisis which began in 2020, not allowed to patrol up to areas where we believe that the line of actual control between India and China extended to in eastern Ladakh. What were these areas? Well, the northernmost point was the Depsang Plains. Then, of course, there was the Galwan region. There was a region called, south of that, the region called Hot Springs as well. Then, of course, the north bank of the Pangong Lake between Finger 4 and Finger 8. Fingers refers to ledges of, refers to geographical features in that particular region which go into the Pangong Lake. Then there is Demchok as well, further south of that. And that, broadly speaking, are all of the areas where China prevented Indian soldiers from patrolling. If that has been restored, and if India can go and patrol right up to the areas prior to the crisis of 2020, then it is a restoration of the status quo in eastern Ladakh. And therefore, it effectively means that the crisis, as it were, for the moment, appears to have ended. However, we will have to wait and see what the fine print is, number one. Number two, we're going to have to wait and see what further discussions take place, because the External Affairs Minister, speaking at the NDTV World Summit just a few days back, did also mention that there will be further conversations to take this process forward. But assuming it holds, and this is by no means a solution to the line of actual control, lay of the land, the actual boundary dispute between India and China. It's just a restoration to the situation as it existed in 2020. But if that by itself does hold, then we can hope for a gradual resumption of the overall relations between India and China.
Absolutely. And Vishnu, the External Affairs Minister, he in fact was also speaking about the diplomacy and the diplomatic talks that happened behind the scenes. He made a very important point there, saying that it is a result of persevering diplomacy, and we have been negotiating since September 2020. So that is a very important point that the External Affairs Minister made there.
No, I think that's absolutely critical. And in as much as there have been military talks at the levels of brigadiers, generals, which have taken place in Ladakh itself, on the south bank of Pangong, in the Chushul area, as far as India is concerned, by and large, and the Chinese equivalent just across the LAC, it's the diplomatic talks, in other words, the political level talks, which have been far more substantive, because military leaders ultimately carry forward a political order or directive, as it were, and they need to implement that on the ground, and obviously with their own perspectives, which the political leaders need to keep into mind. But it's, I would suggest, the diplomatic talks, which have been taking place, as you mentioned, for so many years, which have proven thus far to be entirely unsuccessful, have in the long run resulted in yielded some results as of this morning. So after the frustration of the last couple of years, when not very much progress was made, finally we've seen something which is, I would suggest, at first sight is fairly remarkable, almost difficult for me to believe, in as closely as I've followed the differences between India and China on the line of actual control, that they've actually agreed to restore patrolling rights for Indian soldiers. Therefore, if this relationship, if this equation of the agreement, I should say, does hold, and there is a restoration of the situation pre-Galwan, which was May 2020, then it is a huge step towards Indian and Chinese relations and a restoration of peace over there, number one. Number two, it's unclear at this juncture whether this would immediately result in Chinese soldiers and Indian soldiers deployed, 50,000 soldiers on either side, deployed right on the LAC, whether they would start moving back as well. But presumably, as there are more confidence building measures and both sides work to deal with the situation, the reality on the ground, then that would take place as well, and that would then ultimately lead to a far more substantive trade and diplomatic relationship between India and China. This is fantastic news, because ultimately we need peace in the region. We cannot afford war, and it does appear that China is in no mood for that either.